Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I'm a Premier Field Engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion will be part 5 of an ongoing series talking about compliance settings in Configuration Manager 2012. Today's discussion, we're going to kind of just move our focus from the server side to the client side. Really want to talk about the client experience in general, what you can expect on the client side. Talk about some of the details about how things work on the client side in terms of internal processing. Talk about a few use cases that might be interesting perspectives and ways in which compliance settings can be used, and then we will wrap up this session. All right, so let's get right into it. So in terms of the client experience, there are a few things to consider. First is the overall baseline evaluation. So as we've talked about before, the configurations that we're wanting to validate on a given client, all of those configurations will go either individually or in a unit onto a baseline in order for that baseline to be evaluated. It's evaluated as a whole, right? And that baseline is either compliant, non-compliant. You will see that in just a minute when I go over to the client. Once we evaluate the baseline on the client, being able to view and interpret the results of that and dig into what might be the cause of a non-compliant or whatever is really useful. And then following that with state messaging and understanding that state messaging is the component that actually rolls the compliance up to the site server, right? Understanding how that works, right? For example, state messaging, if you don't have a change in state, then we're not going to send anything up to the site server. We only do that whenever there's specifically a state change detected. I'll show you that as we go through some of the logs, right? So best way to see this is just to kind of bring it into the environment and look. All right, so here I have a client, and I've got a lot of different configuration items down here. In fact, one type for every kind of option that we have. And I just show these to you to show on the client. So if you have a server operator, as an example, that is trying to understand what might be going wrong with a particular kind of compliance evaluation and maybe trying to fix it, interactively, that kind of thing. This is a window that allows you to interact with the various baselines that have been published, deployed to the device. The operator of the owner of the server, whatever, could go through and maybe this is non-compliant. They make some changes, try to get it back in compliance. They can evaluate it again and see if their changes have actually taken effect. Now, be aware there could be a bit of a delay between using cached results perhaps and real results, but still a good interface in order to go through and evaluate whether conditions have changed. Even more powerful perhaps is the ability to view reporting. So here we can give you a really nice XML view of what actually the state is. So this one's pretty easy because it's just one baseline and one configuration item on that baseline. If it was a baseline that had 4 or 5 configuration items, then they would all be listed. You could see maybe there's one of the series that's non-compliant, the other ones are okay, right? So it gives good information to help in a remediation kind of scenario. Also, just to show there's a good XML representation here as well if there's a need to read that kind of thing. All right, and then there is a state messaging component that actually causes the messages to go back and forth to the site server, right? So I'll actually save that discussion until we get into the deep details of how this works, which you'll actually do next. But state messaging is very important. If the state messages aren't flowing back, then the compliance is not going to be up to date like you would want it to be. Right? So let me go into the details of this for a minute, and then I'll pull the lab back in and we'll walk through it. So this is my attempt to kind of show the flow of how this whole process works on the client whenever you trigger an evaluation, right? So just going top down. So however it works, however it happens, there will be an evaluation triggered. So it could be that the server owner is on the server, triggers the evaluation manually, and that starts the process. Could be that we just have a scheduled time come up, the evaluation needs to run, and so it gets triggered and starts. Right? However that happens, the first component in line is DCM agent. So this is actually an interesting log because it will show you the process walking through the evaluation. There's a particular line of text called current state, and it will show you moving from idle to evaluating to initializing, waiting for contents to be downloaded, and so on, right? Depending on what the actual state is. So in some cases, you won't need to really have content re-downloaded. It's already there. In some cases, it'll be a brand new configuration that you're injecting onto the machine, or a new version, or whatever. We'll need to go through a download process. That's actually handled with CI agent, CI store. There's also the typical content download processes that get called data transfer service, content access service, those kinds of things to acquire and make available the content, right? But sticking just with the components for compliance settings, this is what's really involved, right? So just to call attention here too, so I've said before in other sessions, specifically around software updates, that compliance settings is really the framework that a lot of these other things are built upon. You see the commonality in some of these components just right here. You know, CI agent, CI store, not just components that are used for compliance settings, but used for software updating and application deployment and so on, because all of those components are kind of bolted on top of compliance settings, right? Enough of that. So then we'll see, DCM reporting come in. CI state store is interesting too, because this is where you're going to see if the state has changed, and if it has changed, what it has changed to. So as an example, it might be that we don't know the compliance of this. Maybe it's a brand new compliance setting. So it goes from unknown to non-compliant if it's non-compliant after evaluation, or whatever, error, compliant, whatever the state may be. I'll show you some of this. Okay. And then finally, the results are communicated back by the state message component, state message provider, and the state message components. Notice the yellow lines here and the blue lines. Again, my attempt, not perfect, to show the interplay between these components. So there is a lot of crosstalk, if you will, as we go along. And then off to the side, we have the DCM WMI provider. And so there is, whenever we actually do the WMI evaluation and so on, there's logging that happens to show that component specifically in the evaluation that's done in some cases and so on, right? So let me actually show this to you and try to line this up. So let me go back to my lab here and go ahead and start an evaluation again. So timing is really important. So anytime we're looking at the logs, knowing the specific time frame to look at is really pretty critical. So I'm going to wait for this to roll over to the minutes, or 26, and then I'm going to trigger an evaluation. All right, so let me just wait on that. I'm going to go to WMI, and I'm going to evaluate. All right, so 26 straight up. So I could have picked anything. I picked this. In fact, I'm going to dump. Let me get rid of this. So one of the things I'm going to do now that the compliance has run is I'm going to go to the folder where the logs are on the client, and I'm going to copy all of the logs to this folder that I just cleared out. And the reason I do that is a couple of fold. One, it enables me to have these logs static so that they're not continuing to update. If I can actually copy and talk at the same time. So they're not continuing to update. Not a huge deal in my lab, because my lab won't really move forward until I tell it to. It's not busy enough, right? But in production, it would help you with keeping information current in the log so they don't just keep spinning. The other reason is the logs sometimes won't update timestamps and so on the date modified until you copy the logs. There's some lazy writing processes that happen and so on that can lead to that. Not always, but still not a bad idea. So what I'm going to do now, I know it was 26 right up whenever I did this, so I'm going to go sort these alphabetically. I'm first just going to open trace, right? And then I'm going to open up the logs that I want. So I want to make sure that the log path is pointing to what I want it to, the logs folder on my desktop instead of the live logs, and it is. Okay, so first thing is I'm going to pick the logs that I want. So I'm just going to start top down, pick the ones that I know are related from that diagram that I put in there, and go that route. So I'm going to do CI agent, CI downloader. I'm going to eliminate the components like data transfer service and things that I don't that really aren't strictly related here, although they are important. CI task manager. Alright, so content, making sure I don't miss anything. DCM agent, DCM reporting. Here's the DCM WMI provider, which won't show activity right now because the state really hasn't changed, but still. Just making sure I don't miss any. And I still might miss one. I'm going to throw this one in just for good measure, and you'll see why in a minute. Actually, this one. This is the one I want, so I can get rid of the other ones. I'll throw that one in, that one in. Okay, so let me get rid of these now because I don't actually need those. Alright, so now that I know all the logs that were involved in this, I'm going to choose to merge them. Okay? So this will go through and, through the magic of technology, weave these logs together to show exactly which ones were active at what time. So I know that my interesting stuff happened at 26, hopefully really close to the beginning of the hour or the minute. So right down here I can just start right here, and I know this is where the evaluation started. In fact, I can see this was a manual ping SMS CLI UI. I told it to go evaluate, so it started. Right? So creating a new CI agent job for the machine. Here's the state transition that we were talking about. So currently we're in an initialization state, and then we're transitioning, waiting for the CIs to be available. We have to locate, if we need to, download the CIs. Right? Still waiting for CIs. We're looking to download the CIs. So there's jobs that will go on to acquire the content that we need for the CIs. So here we're still in CI agent, right? We move to DCM agent, and we're starting our CI agent job. Now, be aware, I mean, all of this happens really, really quickly. So we do try to line these up as best we can. Sometimes it's not exactly perfect, but you can definitely tell the interchange. So initially we're idle, now we're evaluating, right? We see different detail about the versions of the configuration items that we need. So this is interesting. So we call out the baseline. We're evaluating the baseline. I've said before that whenever we do a compliance setting evaluation, we actually evaluate all of the configuration items on the baseline individually, and if one of them is out of compliance, then the entire baseline is out of compliance. So here you see that. You see that we're evaluating the baseline. We're not really evaluating the baseline so much. We're evaluating the configuration items on the baseline and then making a judgment on the baseline whether it's compliant or not. Anyway, so you see that here. You see the individual configuration item on this particular baseline. And we scroll on down. We can trace this through, right? So if you really want to read and really get a full understanding of how it's going, you can spend some more time in here, but let me just roll on through to another particular place. Here. So here we're in CI state store. So I showed on the diagram where CI state store actually is informative to tell us what happened, right? In this case, it does say an existing CI state change, but any details updated? No, we don't have anything that's new. So there's nothing really to talk about. Now that may or may not be true for all evaluations because some of them may be new, the state might have changed from the last time, whatever the case may be. But still, you see us handling that DCM reporting back and forth. Here you see state messages. Now this is interesting, right? So I mentioned before that the state that on every ConfigMgr client there is a SQL database. In fact, there are a few, right? State messaging utilizes a SQL database as well, right? It's a CE database. It's called State Message Store, SDF, and this is where we store a number of the details about the state messages that need to go back and forth. Now, why do we use a local database instead of using WMI, right? Well, we still use WMI, but there are certain things that need to be done that are more problematic for something like WMI, queries that really WMI may not even be able to do. So for that reason, some of the things are offloaded to this database. I'll show you the database here in a second. Don't worry about the database. It's not anything I've ever had to go into and try to fix. I mean, reinstalling the client would be easier than trying to fix the database locally, but it's interesting to know what's there, right? So we roll on through. We see the state messages provider. If there's something that's been updated, then we will go ahead and send it up, right, and so on, right? So that's really the logging information. Flew through that with a little bit of speed, but not wanting to get mired down in the minutia. In fact, that's really the only tour through the logs I'm going to do, but really just want to show what's there. So if it does come into troubleshooting, I mean, hopefully you will never really be in a position that you need to go into the logs and troubleshoot like this. But if you do, knowing the components that are responsible can be very helpful. Knowing how to line them up and walk through them can be very helpful, right? So while I'm on the client, I mentioned the database. Let me go open the database and show it to you. In fact, I've copied it locally. Okay, so I'm using SQL 2008 specifically because with SQL 2008 I can open an SDF file. With later versions of SQL I can't, right? So you see I've already actually pointed to this. It's using SQL Server Compact. So I'm just going to connect. And like any database, it has tables and there are views and so on, right? So if you look, this is not hugely different than what we have in WMI. In fact, just to illustrate that, let me see, do I have WMI Explorer? No. Just to illustrate that, root CCM state message, right? So if we enumerate classes on state message and recursive and hit OK and go in there, we see the same CCM state message, CCM state message serial number. So there is definitely still information here. If I look at instances, I see a whole bunch of instances here. If I just pull this off to the side for a minute and move this over, if I do a query here, I can talk or I type in such, right? We see similar kinds of things lining up just as it is in WMI. Now, so that's not to really point out the details of when one is used versus the other, how they're complementary, whatever. It's just to show you how the components line up. Again, should you worry about troubleshooting on the database side? No. In fact, I would never really even open this. I just show it to you for informational purposes so you can see what's there. Really no need to troubleshoot this at all. If it really gets to it, installing the client again is an easier approach, right? So that's kind of behind the scenes on how this all works. So let me close this out, all right, and pull the lab back out. All right, so that said, I want to turn away from the technical minutia and really get into some discussion of use cases. So there's the traditional approach to using compliance settings, and what that is what we just saw. You have a baseline. On that baseline are anywhere from 1 to any number of configuration items. As you send that baseline out into your environment, you need to evaluate that baseline, and you expect that all of those configuration items have an opportunity to be compliant. Meaning, if you have 4 configuration items on a baseline, the intention is that those 4 will be compliant, right? In order for the baseline to be compliant, and you want to see compliance in your environment. Well, that may be a good use of it, but it may be that there's other ways to leverage compliance settings that could be just as beneficial, and that's where we get into the non-traditional approach. So thinking a bit outside the box may be helpful, and so there's 2 things I want to talk about here. The first is actually something that we do in Configuration Manager 2007 for endpoint protection. That kind of illustrates maybe one approach to non-traditional ways we can use compliance settings. To do that, let me pull in the lab. So in traditional, again, just to highlight, we expect all the configuration items on a baseline to be compliant. But what if instead we want to use compliance settings to kind of tell us the reading in our environment on a range of options, right? So I just kind of put this together real fast to show, but if you look at this baseline, there are 4 configuration items on it, right? And this set of configuration items will be used to evaluate whether virus signatures are within a certain time range, right? So if we're testing to see virus signatures less than a day in age, between 1 and 3 days, between 3 and 5 days, greater than 5 days, right? And so this information could be very, very useful to you. You know, doing something else similar to this, where we're trying to test a range of options, could be very, very useful to you. But this particular baseline, because of the way it's configured, will never, ever have a chance of being compliant, right? Because in order for a baseline to be compliant, all of the configurations on that baseline need to be compliant. Well, it's just looking at this, it's obvious. A virus signature, date since last renewed, whatever, the date on it, can never fall into all 4 of these categories. It can only fall into one. It's either going to be less than a day, or between 1 and 3, or between 3 and 5, or greater than 5. No way can it ever be satisfying more than one of these conditions. So the result of it would be your baseline will be forever non-compliant. But as long as you understand why it's non-compliant, and that it's not a big deal, that you're really using that baseline to judge a range versus specific compliance, then it can be very, very useful, right? Kind of a non-traditional way of thinking about it, but a very useful way, right? Well, then this other one I want to chat about just for a minute is also kind of a non-traditional way. So in this scenario, this actually comes from working with a specific customer request. The need was this is kind of, the intention is to represent a retail location. So this particular customer had lots of retail locations for various reasons. They did not want to offload the job of evaluating a particular set of compliance to all of these particular devices in that location. So instead, what they wanted to do, there was some device health, some machine health, not config manager client health necessarily, though that could be part of it, but just device health. They knew what the devices in this particular retail location or their particular retail location should look like in terms of configuration, in terms of accessibility, in terms of file content, those various kinds of things. And they wanted to offload or have the single server in each retail location be responsible for connecting to these devices that were in the retail location and check them for, first of all, can you ping them? Can you connect to them? Can we look in file shares and make sure the content is correct? You know, various numbers of checks that this particular system was doing through compliance settings. Now, to make that work, you have to understand that you have to use script, right? If you're using a registry configuration item or WMI or SQL or whatever, those would expect to run locally. With a script, you could actually reach out across the local network and check these items. Now, there's implications of that. There's certain timings that we need the script to run and complete within. If not, we need to make some tweaks and site control settings and so on. Don't want to do those lightly, right? But for the right business case and business need, this could be very interesting, right, as a non-traditional way. I show these to you. There could be more just to kind of stimulate thought, right? So with that, I kind of wrap up. Again, not a ton of time spent in the session here to illustrate, but did want to at least go on the client side, talk about those things, share some ideas, and so we will wrap this session here. We will finish up the series in session 6, so we will see you next